Dictator Putin's representatives suddenly announced that they are ready to end the war against Ukraine quickly and meet the 50-day deadline set by Trump. Moreover, the Kremlin unexpectedly started showering Trump with compliments after his warning to Putin and his decision to supply more weapons to Ukraine. But in Germany, they urge not to trust the Russians because under the guise of wanting to hold peace talks, they are preparing to attack Ukraine with 2,000 drones per day. But American analysts insist that Trump has indeed taken the Russian threat seriously. And after promising new arms supplies to Ukraine and threatening to impose devastating secondary tariffs if Russia does not agree to peace within 50 days, Trump called the peace signals from Russia's Vladimir Putin nothing but words without any action. Despite these harsh statements, Trump still expressed hope that Putin would nevertheless take steps toward peace in Ukraine before the end of this 50-day period. However, such optimism from Trump does not match the current mood in the Kremlin, which is once again trying to lure Trump into its trap. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is July 20th on the calendar. Today we'll discuss how the Kremlin has started flattering Trump again, praising him, especially after his phone conversation in early July, when Trump said that Putin is deceiving him. Russians have started praising Trump again, and in addition, they have started to declare that they are ready to end the war against Ukraine as soon as possible. We'll discuss all of this, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So today in the Kremlin, they suddenly started showering Donald Trump with compliments and declared that they are ready for a quick end to the war. But it's obvious that the Kremlin is being deceitful again. The Kremlin, through the press secretary of the Russian dictator Dmitry Peskov, claims that they are supposedly ready for a quick process of settling the war against Ukraine. However, Moscow insists that not everything depends only on them. Here is a quote from Peskov. Yes, Russia is ready to move quickly. For us, the main thing is to achieve our goals. Our goals are clear and obvious. They do not change, but the process does not depend only on us. Regarding a possible meeting between United States President Donald Trump and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, Peskov noted that it is possible and will happen in due time. Perhaps the meeting is necessary to formalize some major agreements that will eventually be reached after a huge amount of work has been done, but for now, that time has not yet come. This work still needs to be done. And let me remind you that already this year, under Trump, Ukraine and Russia have held 2 rounds of negotiations in Istanbul. The Russian delegation voiced unacceptable demands to end the war against Ukraine during the meeting. Let me remind you, Russia demanded that Ukraine accept a neutral status, meaning giving up NATO membership. In fact, to give up 5 regions, including territories that Russia does not control, withdraw troops from these areas, refuse reparations, agree to the complete lifting of all sanctions against Russia, and agree to the protection of the rights of Russian speakers. Later, dictator Putin announced a new demand for ending the war. The Kremlin demands that Ukraine recognize the so-called referendums in the occupied territories. So Peskov is just lying again, and the main thing is that Trump doesn't see in Putin's eyes a desire to seek peace again. But it seems that this is exactly the Russians' intention when they make such statements. Moscow has suddenly started praising United States President Donald Trump, despite all his unflattering remarks about Putin. This happened after Trump's threats regarding a peace agreement with Ukraine. And today, the same Peskov said, quote, "It is clear that President Trump is the president of the world's largest country, the world's largest economy. Plus, everyone is used to his rather tough and straightforward rhetoric." At the same time, he confirms his intentions and continues to do everything possible to promote a peaceful settlement. Moreover, when commenting on the recent conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the press secretary of the Russian dictator stated that it was a business-like dialogue. It was a pragmatic, business-like conversation between people who firmly stand by their positions but who are ready to listen to each other. In this attention, Peskov is talking about the conversation at the beginning of July, after which Trump said he was disappointed in Putin, that Putin was deceiving him, that Putin was constantly lying to him, and that it was time to move from talk to action. But in the Kremlin, they say it was a wonderful dialogue. It was a dialogue between two strong men who listened to each other. But as you understand, not for nothing, in the Kremlin they started praising Donald Trump, and as Segodnya Telegraph writes, the United States president has seriously addressed the Russian threat, not after promising new arms supplies to Ukraine and threatening to impose secondary tariffs if Russia doesn't agree to peace. Within 50 days. Trump called Vladimir Putin's peace signals nothing but words without any action. But the whole problem is that the Kremlin's flattery actually works on Trump. Because despite all the harsh statements, Trump expressed hope that Putin would still take steps toward peace in Ukraine before the end of this 50-day period. However, such optimism does not match the current mood in the Kremlin. Trump's main statement was received in Moscow not with concern, but with relief regarding these secondary tariffs. And after this statement, the Moscow Exchange Index rose by 2.7%, and the Russian ruble strengthened by 0.8% against the Chinese yuan. Russian officials feared large-scale new sanctions and were satisfied that Trump limited himself to introducing mostly unenforceable tariffs against Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa countries. The rhetoric coming from Putin's circle remains aggressive. Didn't Trump scare them? Former president of Russia and the main alcoholic of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, threatened to strike Western countries in the event of an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Moreover, the well-known propagandist and so-called defense commentator on the Russia One television channel Igor Korodchenko called for intensifying strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure and expressed hope that these strikes would force Ukraine to capitulate within the next 50 days. The very same 50 days that Trump gave to Putin. The Russian army is turning all this warlike rhetoric into aggressive actions. And since the last 16th of July, Russia has launched more than 400 missiles and drones, specifically at Ukraine's energy infrastructure. In the directions of Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and Konstantinivka, the Russians have concentrated 160,000 troops. And it is expected that in the coming days, a large-scale summer offensive by the Russians will begin in eastern Ukraine. And these signals indicate that Trump is not responding to Russia with sufficient determination. And then it says that in order to force Putin to accept a peace agreement, a real strategy of maximum pressure is needed. It should be based on three interconnected elements. The first is closing loopholes in the sanctions regime, which provides Russia with resources for further aggression. Despite Rosatom's involvement in the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its assistance to Iran's nuclear program, the United States has not yet imposed sanctions on this company. Thanks to this exception, Rosatom uses a convoluted corporate structure to reportedly finance the Russian defense industry. Instead of secondary tariffs against importers from Russia, the United States should have imposed targeted sanctions against the refineries that process that very Russian oil. Sanctions against the Shadow Fleet also need to be strengthened until the United States adds all approximately 600 tankers that Russia uses to the sanctions list. The United States should fully coordinate with the European Union to eliminate loopholes for circumventing sanctions at the earliest stages. Because the current sanctions regime is reactive, which allows Russia to refine its sanction evasion tactics before the West has time to respond. The second element is expanding the range of weaponry being supplied to Ukraine. Most likely, the aid package funded by NATO allies will include a Patriot air defense battery and long-range Army tactical missile system missiles. Although supplying $10 billion worth of weapons seems like a significant amount, it's important to remember that one Patriot battery costs $1 billion, an interceptor missile is nearly $4 million, and each Army tactical missile system missile is $1 million. So when we add all this up, we realize that $10 billion isn't actually that much. Considering these structural expenses, the current scale of Trump's military aid is unlikely to deter Russia. Ukraine spends up to 2 million artillery shells annually, while the Russian army has huge stockpiles of North Korean shells. Therefore, the United States must significantly increase artillery exports to Ukraine. And although Trump refrained from supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking Moscow, the possibility of such a delivery should be reconsidered if Putin decides to escalate the war within the allotted 50 days. And the third element is support for Ukraine's high-tech defense sector. In recent months, the armed forces of Ukraine have developed inexpensive interceptor drones to combat enemy UAVs and have introduced a new version of the Neptune missile with a range of up to 1,000 kilometers. Given the scale of domestic innovation, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has already offered Trump a mega deal to transfer Ukrainian drone technologies in exchange for American weaponry. And Trump should seriously consider this proposal because on one hand it would strengthen Ukraine's long-term ability to resist, and on the other hand it would enhance the security of the entire North Atlantic Alliance. Plus, Americans would finally get proper drones, the very ones that are used in modern warfare. So friends, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. And if you want to support the work of this channel, you can do so financially with any donation on any platform. All the links and details are in the description of this video or by the QR code on your screens. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.